Okay, you're good.
Oh. Welcome everyone to our Public Service Building Committee meeting. Grateful for your attendance here this evening. This chair doesn't feel any better than it did a while ago, so we'll continue on. We'll have notification to our Public Service Building.
It's the YouTube. Yeah.
You didn't hear me twice. We have an invocation and pledge of allegiance by Robert Bowler.
Our gracious Father in heaven, we're thankful for this opportunity that we have to meet together as citizens and to discuss the public safety and public safety building here in North Ogden. We're thankful and grateful for this great city that we have to live in and for the opportunities and the freedoms and the protection that it provides us and our families. We're grateful, we're thankful for all that Thou has given us, and we're grateful for each other and the opportunities that Thou has provided for us and our families. And we pray and give thanks and do so in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll move on with our agenda. The consent agenda, item 1 and 2 is discussion or action to consider the April 8th Public Safety Building Committee meeting minutes. Is there any questions or discussion on those minutes? Then do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Make a motion to approve.
I have a motion to approve by Robert Bowler. Do you have a second?
I'll second it.
Second, Lieutenant Crowder. Any other discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, motion carries. We'll move on to our active agenda. The first item is public comments. Is there any public comments from the group assembled here this evening? Maybe I would just make one comment. I looked up this evening to see, as a taxpayer, we get concerned about taxes and buildings and this type of thing. My taxes is just around $200 last year that I paid to North Ogden. I thought, what a premium city to live in for that little amount of money. I was extremely grateful. Probably double my taxes, Mayor, I'm fine.
No plans to do so. I'll make that clear. Maybe you might want to check to see if there's any on Zoom that have.
There's not any comments at this time.
Okay. See no public comments, we'll move on with the agenda. Item 4 is the Weber County Sheriff's Office proposal. Presenter will be Dirk Quinney, Chief of Police.
Thank you, Council, Mayor. So last night, council meeting, the Weber County Sheriff's Office, Sheriff Arbon and some of his staff were able to propose the services that they could provide us to North Ogden City if North Ogden City chose to contract for those services. The sheriff and his staff did a great job with their presentation, explaining what it is they have at their disposal. They have a tremendous amount of resources and staff and just some different specialty aspects that come with their type of agency. In the end, the council voted unanimously to move on with the public safety building and retain their police department. So that's where we sit today. And I would just like to reiterate my feelings regarding the sheriff's office and what they do and their staff. And professional, dedicated 100% on board with cooperation with other agencies. And in 25 years, I've had probably hundreds of interactions with sheriff's office employees, and every one of them has been positive. I have nothing but good to say about their staff. But I am happy to see that North Ogden City appreciates their police department and chose to stay that route. So, thank you.
Thank you for that report. Next item on the agenda is continued committee and community interaction. Presenter will be Kurt Quinney, Chief of Police.
So our job is not done. We have a lot of work to do. We have a long ways to go. And we have to maintain the support that we worked so hard to get with the community. So I just encourage all of us, every chance we get, to engage in that conversation. And I'm not saying to, whatever your perspective is, we want all perspective. We just want input. And so any chance you get to reach out or engage in one of your neighbors or whatever community events you attend, and maybe make that part of the conversation. We just want some input so we know what direction the citizens of North Ogden want us to go, and we can work for them and do this thing right. And I know we probably will be talking about some projects, maybe some additional flyers and things we can send out as mailers or post online or through social media or whatnot. So any ideas that way, obviously would be. So we just still have a lot of work to go do. So we don't want to let it down with that.
Thank you. I think it's important as committee members that we keep that in mind and drum up support for, this is one of the biggest projects that's ever been done in North Ogden. And so it behooves us as committee members to get out and sell the project and make it happen. So thank you, Chief, for that report. The next item on our agenda, next steps on the public safety building. Presenter will be John Call, City Manager and Attorney. He will cover RFP for construction, explanation of bond funding approved by the council, committee involvement in the selection process for contractor and architect, acquisition of neighboring property. John.
Thank you, Mayor Chuck. So the very first part of this discussion focuses on that RFP for construction and design. Mayor Berube and I have met with several individuals and with the mayor's guidance, the process we're focusing in on is what's called a CMGC, or it's not, there's 3 different types of build processes. Correct me if I'm wrong. To all the contractors in the room. One is a design build, which is what you typically traditionally think of as the construction, where you hire an architect, they design a structure, then you find a contractor to construct it for you. That's a more traditional sense. That's how most homes are built, for example. Then there's another one that's called a design, wait, I said that wrong. Dang it. The design build is the one, sorry, the design builds where you actually hire a contractor. They do the design and construction and build it the way they want, and you work with them. And then the one in between that is the CMGC, where it's closer to the design build, where you're getting an architect and a contractor on the team up front before you start designing the structure. And the goal of that is to try and focus on and have the architect and the contractor talk about ways to keep the goals of the project in line with what you want, but maybe find some cost savings in design. For example, the example I always use is a beam. You know, if you're spanning a room this wide, you've got a certain beam load that you have to carry. Sometimes if you extend that wall 2 feet too far, your beam cost can double or exponentially grow because it gets fatter, it gets wider and more expensive. And so the contractor can often help kind of with some of those design schedules and with their experience explain, hey, this is, if we shorten these walls, if we do this differently, if you move your elevator here or your server room here, then it's, you know, if you put your mechanical room in the middle, then there's less lines to run, or it's things like that. So they it's kind of value design, value engineering it so that to get the best bang for the buck. With a couple of the groups that we've talked to, and universally they recommend this for this type of facility. There's some architects who love to do what they love to do, and they love to build the Taj Mahal. And I think Mayor Berube and the council made it clear, the goal is to build a good functional facility that will last and serve the city for years and years, not to build a monument to the council or whatever. I mean, that's the goal. And I think that's been the sentiment this committee's had from the outset. So that's the goal. The process is to kind of create the team with the architect and contractor up front. The one hang up with that process is you typically, when you're doing that, is you're not getting a fixed bid cost up front. What you're getting is a fixed commitment to a percentage. And what I mean by that is the general contractor will typically say, we will build the building for what it costs the subcontractor plus a little bit to cover our expenses. And usually that little bit for the expenses is what you're looking at in the negotiation in the RFP process. If that makes sense. And architects typically, it's a similar thing. With us knowing the size of the building, they'll be able to give us a pretty good estimate of their fee, what to expect. But that'll include engineering and all that. But there is a little bit with the contractor where you don't have we know that it will cost X number of dollars, because until the structure is designed, there's no way to even bid that out. So most of them do have general impression of cost per square foot, things like that. Several contractors have built facilities just like this one or similar enough that they have a good feel. And we will do our best as we go out for the RFP for both of these to reach out to every competent entity that we think can do these jobs, as well as do the public notices and stuff, because sometimes there's groups we aren't aware of or haven't dealt with, but you know, it'll be just like any other public offering where it's bid out, and we'll have a selection committee, which is number C. Maybe I'll just jump over into that one right now. And the expectation is to have members of this committee participate in the selection. That's kind of what we've talked about. Mayor Berube.
John, I have just a thought for the committee to consider along those lines. You know, we've heard a lot about the design build savings that took place over at the Public Works. I'm wondering, Chief Quinney and myself met with a group of individuals the other day. Just so we don't miss anything on the building committee portion. There's two things I'd like the committee to consider tonight. One of the suggestions that came up from the group was, there were three. Have we tapped grants? I think the chief answered that, but we did agree to contact Weaver State, I think, chief, and see if they have some expertise that we've missed. Second thing is they talked about trying to get donations to help in the construction costs. And the third one was to make sure we're looking at a concept similar to the design build. I would like the committee to consider two things. One, appointing Paul Mackley as the chair to raise funds to help in the cost of the construction. I'd like this committee to consider putting Lynn Satterthwaite on the building committee to make sure that we don't miss anything that was gained from that previous opportunity. And then, of course, I think the chief or whoever we need to can contact Weaver State in that regard. I think that the committee had some things that we ought to consider, the group that we talked with. think it's, the committee ought to know too, that there is a group organizing to put a referendum to stop the bond. Get it on the ballot for a vote. And which is their prerogative, right? They have the right to do that. And I understand they are in the process of organizing that situation, but I was just wondering if the committee would consider letting me approach or Mayor Chuck approach these individuals to participate to see if we can accomplish some of the things that are laid out there. You skipped to item C, John, so that's why it's chiming in.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, but so that, I think, obviously, we're not picking the committee tonight. I think the next step will be writing the RFPs and then forming that selection committee with these suggestions in mind, as well as making sure that this group is adequately represented without exceeding our number of quorum members. Probably a good fill would probably be around the 3-person, from this group. You don't want to make it so big you can't function, but the committee probably, Mayor.
John, I'm just wondering, I appreciate your input on this. Before we send the RFP out, though, shouldn't we maybe get some of that group together that had success before to see if there's things we should incorporate in the RFP that might help us build? I'm not talking about building a metal shed with, we need a building that will house and be efficient and effective and will last for years in the city. But I'm just wondering if we miss something in the RFP, if we don't get that involvement, up front, just a thought.
And that's part of the reason that I haven't written anything with an RFP yet, because I wanted to have this discussion and have a chance for the group to talk about these type of things. And then I like this idea of let's all get the bones together, and then we need to circulate it to those involved in the decision making so that we're not missing those things. And hopefully we can get that or some involvement from these outside groups who people aren't committee members, but maybe have some good feedback for this process.
Yeah, I think we're open. We've said we want to build a facility that's not a Taj Mahal, but that it's a facility we can be proud of, that will meet the needs of our public safety crew. I just want to make sure we don't miss any opportunities, whether it's through getting grants, whether it's through receiving donations, or whether it's properly structured in the RFP that will help us in our board meeting. So, I don't know what the committee's thoughts are.
Do we want to talk about those thoughts right now with the group, but then we can go and cover B and C, or B and D as kind of after we talk about that?
Personally, I think it's a great suggestion, I think if these two good men were to approach those two good men and invite them to be involved, that's probably a great idea. That's a good stepping stone in the right direction, because there is a lot of misunderstanding and misconception and speculation and all those other words that go along. There's a lot of that out there. So I think if you and the mayor got together, Brent, and approach them, that would be ideal, because they would be involved from the get-go, and they've had some great ideas. Lynn's had some good ideas. When he was running for mayor, he had great ideas as to how to build a new public safety building and help accommodate the chief. And so I think we bring those ideas to the table now. Let's get those good people involved. So.
Mayor, I'm available at your timeline to do whatever.
When's our next
accommodate that.
retirement club meeting? Yeah, what's that?
What's that?
When's our next retirement club meeting? We've got to schedule around that.
That's right.
We can coordinate that, Mayor. So,
You want me to make contact with those people, or are you going to?
I said we can coordinate.
Okay.
Outside the meeting, you and I.
Okay. I think that's good, and I was trying to think, I have a list of those, I think I have a list of those people who were on the committee before. That we could discuss the project with them. And I think it's a good idea too, if we could nip it in the bud as far as the referendum group is concerned and say, okay, what's wrong with the idea and what do you suggest? I assume you know who they are.
Well, I think, and I appreciated if the chief would chime in here, I think their concern is the cost. As I said in the meeting, I don't have any evidence that it's less than what we're talking about here, but we can build what we want, it's something less than that, I don't think anybody objects to that. So I think if we can get our hands around the cost and get some degree of confidence in them, I think it's given, we don't have the cash to pay, if it's 6 million or 7 million, we don't have the cash to pay that, we're gonna have to bond to some degree. But Chief, I don't know, it seemed like their major concern was the cost and the amount of potential indebtedness, not that they were objected to the building.
You know, this group here, we spent nearly a year scouring the potential needs of this facility, and we came up with what we believe is a fair representation of what we need. And I'm not hearing any objection, any dispute. I believe that the people understand that we did our job. And like Mayor Berube says, if we get those needs met, we're 4, 5, 6 million, we're all happy camper. You know, but a few of the experts have chimed in and given us some estimates of some numbers, and it is what it is. But I don't think there's anybody in here that will say, as long as we get those needs met, we really don't care what it costs. And if somebody could figure out how to save the citizens a few tax dollars, we're all for it. Absolutely. So
I think if we get the word out regarding what the estimated cost is and how it will affect them, how much we're gonna have to borrow. Like I say, the small amount that I pay in taxes to North Ogden City is minuscule when it comes to my taxes had about 50%. That would only be $75 a whole year.
Let me just comment, I think we're pretty close, and chime in here, John, if I'm out in left field. But I think we've got a pretty good path to the fact that property taxes for the public safety building wouldn't have to be increased, but I can't predict 20 years down the road. But I can predict that I think we've got a pathway where if any increase would be minimal, but we're hoping for no increase, and particularly our estimate of the first year would be, I don't know if you check on this, John, but interest only is it can take about construction of the building about 14 months. And by the time we get through all the processes, we're thinking ground will probably be broken, depending on what happens with the referendum sometime in the spring. And so we think there's a pathway. Taxes wouldn't have to be increased hardly at all. We can pull this off. So, but I'm not sure that's the relief that everyone's looking at. There seems to be a focus on the cost.
Well, what are the costs gonna do between now and next spring?
What they've done the last 2 months, they've like tripled for lumber
Yeah.
and concrete.
So I guess, I don't know, my concern, Mayor, is, how do you expedite the process without facing another double or triple increase?
I'd have to ask John, if we know there's a referendum in place and the bond issuer knows that, John, are we kind of stuck waiting?
Yeah,
They
so,
won't issue or what?
so if the referendum petition is successful, meaning they gather all the signatures and comply with all the rules, then essentially the decision by the council, the bond resolution is what it's called, is on hold until the election is held. So that the council has no authority to move forward with the bonding until that election and that decision is answered.
So I,
In the sorry, Robert.
well, no, I was just gonna say, so I think part of this needs to be an education piece that, while you're putting this referendum together, prices are going to double and triple again. And so ultimately, by doing the referendum, you can actually cost the city more, right? I mean, maybe that's just common sense, but I think it probably needs to be pointed out.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I guess, John, my question is, how far can we move ahead if we know there's a referendum out there that has a chance of being put on the ballot? Is anyone going to issue a bond knowing that's the case?
No, they legally, we couldn't issue the bond. Anything that we wanted to do to move forward would have to be used cash on hand. So like we could pay for the design work and the contractor to be involved in the designing. But we couldn't, we would not get a revenue bond out to market. We'd be legally stopped from doing that.
So we, just to clarify in my mind, so we have to wait to see if the referendum develops, and if it's adequately documented and approved by the county, once we know there's one in process. Is that
Correct.
Correct?
And
I'm sorry, Don, I'm just playing this timeline out in my head. From the time the council passes the resolution, you have 90 days for the referendum,
30 days
30 days.
for a financing referendum, it's
And so
30 days.
What's the deadline to get that, for that to be put on the ballot in November?
45 days before the election. So
So there
that's
is time.
typically September. So in theory, and we can provide more details. It's a new referendum law. And as I was talking with the reporters this morning, the way I explained it was, no one knows how to deal with these referendums because hardly anyone's dealt with one since the law was passed last year. But in theory, what it is in theory, there's a 30-day period for them to do the stuff they need to do to perfect their referendum petition. And then once it's been perfected, then that would force us to wait until November to hear yes or no on whether or not the referendum was successful.
Is there a chance that this referendum could stay valid and carry forward past the date necessary to get on the ballot, where it would actually have to be carried to another election?
The only way that would happen is if the council didn't make the decision soon enough in time to basically, there's no way that the referendum petition, if it was initiated in the next month, for example, there's nothing that would hold it up to not get on the ballot. So the only reason it wouldn't is if the decision was made in September of this year to do the bonding, then there's a chance that the petition would push into a special election next year. I think that's the question you're answering.
Yeah.
So Chief, the answer to that, so we don't get a delay and have continuing increased costs, is to make sure the council gets through all of the resolutions and requirements at least 45 days before the election. Is that correct, John?
It's actually closer to 75.
Because
Yeah.
they have to have the referendum perfected so it can get on the ballot. So it could be up to 75 days.
Yeah.
Which would put, what date is that for the council to be shooting for?
Now you're trying to ask me to do math. It would be in August 15th-ish. To put that in perspective of what that next step entails with this bond that the council has said they would like to move forward with the sales tax, they could approve the resolution in 2 weeks. Because it's not hard to write it up. It's just a matter of timing on when the council wants to do it. My impression from last night is there's nothing holding them back other than just making sure that they're educating the public about the process, what they're doing. With the revenue bond, they'll do what's called a bond resolution, or bond parameters resolution that says this is how much the council is authorizing borrow up to. So it's not, this is how much we're going to borrow, it's this is how much we can borrow. Think of it like when you get pre-qualified for a loan on a house, right? You're qualified up to this much. It's that type of a discussion. And it also lists the term and some of the other terms of the bond. The council could do that at any time between now and then. After they pass that resolution, within the next 30 days, there's a public hearing on the resolution. And it allows the council in that time frame to, after the public hearing, maybe say, okay, we're going to reverse our resolution. But technically, when that bond resolution is passed is when the referendum process would start, meaning that the folks involved with the referendum would start their paperwork. So in theory, if the council pulled the trigger sometime in the next 2 months, everything's moving, everything's starting. If that makes sense.
So
Is that good strategy? To do it now?
I think if the council's serious, sorry, I know the council's serious. I think if the council's goal is to keep moving the project forward, that our financial advisor would recommend that the bond resolution, parameters resolution be passed sometime in the next 30 days. And so, but that there's a little bit of a window other than just because the council might want to help get the word out. So
what about this house over here and buying this house? I mean, is that something that we can move on? Oh, is it coming up here?
number D.
Okay, all right. Okay, yeah, well, I'll wait.
Well,
the price is just going up and up, you know?
Yeah, so let me just answer one or give you one clarification on the bond. So there's two type of bonds that cities do, that these are the only type you typically see. One's a general obligation bond that's tied to property tax that results in a direct property tax increase. The other one is a revenue bond where the city can pledge any revenue they have, property tax, sales tax, recreation fees, whatever they have as a revenue. That's the type the council has authorized. So the ones that you've typically voted for at the polls, like for the library, the schools, those are general obligation bonds tied directly to property taxes. As the mayor indicated, the goal with the revenue bond is that it would be tied to the sales tax revenues of the city, which are just over $3 million. And that we would not need to raise property taxes over what the council did last year in with the transportation impact fee. So, or not impact fee, transportation utility fee. That discussion, if you remember that. But people will ask you, because you're on the committee, well, if it's not like the library bond, think of it as a revenue, it's a sales tax bond, it's not a property tax bond.
John, the city can use property taxes to pay the bond if needed. Now, last night, if you listen, the council is considering assigning all property tax to be used for public safety. The thing we're gonna have to do is make sure that the building is included in public safety, because my understanding is when you issue that revenue bond, the backup is having property tax available to pay the bond. And if it's already all committed by ordinance, that could create a little bit of a problem. Unless we really define that, you know, this is purely public safety, because it does have a court in it, right? So we're gonna have to be a little careful there, but I just want to clarify that John is right. The primary source is sales tax, but the people that buy the bond also want to know that you're willing to pledge property taxes if needed as a source of repayment.
Yeah, they're looking for the most secure revenue source they can get. The ones that are always tied to property tax, the general obligation bonds or the GO bonds, those get a better rate than the generic revenue bonds. In the current market, the rate's not that different. And so the council decided they'd rather start the process, get a decision now, than wait for November. Even though, as I think you're all aware, they've been very conscientious of the need to get public involvement, and you know, they want to move the project forward, you know, at this point.
Well, do we have an estimate of the due diligence the underwriters will have to do? Those who end up having to sell the bonds, so they're going to want to do some due diligence on the city's finances, et cetera. And they give us an estimate of what amount of time that would take, so the bonds could, we have targeted issuance date of the bonds.
Yeah, so it was on us, we can forward the schedule. Evan, correct me if I'm wrong on the date, but in theory, from bond parameter resolution approval to actually starting to receive funds could be as short as 60 days. Typically, it's closer to 90. But once it's issued, we could get the money at any point in the future. But once the bond council and the underwriters would start the process and get all their ducks in a row so that when the city was ready to sign on the dotted line, everything was in line. But it's about, I think it was 60 days, Mayor, was the shortest time frame that our financial advisors told us it could happen in.
You know, we've got a little bit of work to do too, because we want to get the best rating we can on the bond, because it's tied to the interest rate. So, as you know, we have $1 million bond outstanding right now. For our coverage ratios, it makes sense for us to do some analyzation. Evan has brought that up. Consider that would have a bearing on our rating. So there's a little bit of internal work to do, but it's getting it moving along.
This, I don't know enough about bonds, but is there a way, Evan, to consolidate the one that's out there with this one and have a better rate, like almost refinance that one?
Yeah, they can do that. It would end up with a higher principal in the end.
We've got the money out in the RDA fund, Robert.
Okay.
It's adequate enough to pay that off, because I think we've got, what, 3 or 4 more payments? What is it?
Oh, okay, that's
And the
great.
money's coming, the payment, the principal payment and interest is coming out of the RDA funds already. So we have enough sitting in there to pay that off if it makes a difference in our rating. The rate's what, 2.32% of it? Yeah. On current bond, the one we're talking about now, last time we had was around 2% or November.
We're actually planning to bring that up as part of our budget amendment and make the proposal to just pay it off. And the council will discuss that on the 27th.
That's great.
So
I didn't-
we'll see what they say.
I didn't realize it was that short of a time and, you know,
Yeah.
it was left on.
It's about a $45,000 interest savings that we get. And it's estimated.
I think it will be nice for us to just have it gone and then look at our finances so that there won't be a draw on the sales tax money there.
So will they also look at the property that the city owns in addition to the finances? Will they look at?
It's an unsecured, it's a
Okay,
bond, basically secured by the revenues that as John mentioned.
okay,
That's why it's called revenue bond, right?
okay. Well, I'm learning.
But no, that's good because people, you might be approached by your neighbors. And so it's not tied to real estate or buildings, it's tied to the future sales tax revenues, property tax revenues. So, and yeah, that's a great question. So D, if we're ready to move on, the home here just to the east of us, we do have a signed contract for its purchase. The council has to ratify that contract. That'll be presented to them on the 27th as well. Timing wise, to put it in perspective, if you're asked, it seemed to work out timing wise for the homeowner as well and what their future plans were with the building. And so it really has kind of, I think, been a win for everybody. So, and they've been very great people to work with. She grew up in the house and has been very fun to engage with, and her and her husband are really nice people. So, and I think at this point, with what we have planned, that'll be the only acquisition for this project. I think there will be some additional fencing included. The duplex is just east of us. The property line isn't clear to everyone who drives by, so there'll be, with this construction, some reworking there. And we plan to engage with the neighbors, the landlord, and just make sure everyone knows what's happening so that we're not catching people off guard and all of a sudden there's track goes out here digging a hole in the ground and they're losing access to something that they've done, and tied to that as well as so it won't be happening this season. Next season, we'll be moving the community gardens. So we have a new location for that. And Tiffany is evaluating some locations for that. Yeah,
Your goat pasture will work.
my goat pasture. My goats would love to eat plants. They, yeah, they get hungry
We
little
might not know
goats.
the answer to this question yet, but will the RFP be for proposals for either design build or the CMGT? Or is it gonna be for one or the other?
So there's two ways to do the CMGC. And it is, you can send out one request for proposal saying, architect and contractor, build your team and come to us. And that oftentimes operates closer to the design build process. The other option is you send out two RFPs and pull in the groups and you build the team, or the city builds the team. And we've talked about that. I think that was one of the things the mayor was talking about, is let's make sure that we're looking at the options, getting feedback from those who have some other experience, so that we're not forcing us into a more expensive option. But I think that document might, I think we'll be having it ready here in the next couple of weeks to start having the final details and discussion surrounding that, and hopefully get some feedback on these other participants getting involved.
John, just one other thing on that. Is there a local contractor, maybe even somebody within North Ogden, right, that could work on the RFP, right? When it's put out, that maybe wouldn't have to, like when you're bringing a crew from Tooele or, Utah County or whatever to build a building here, it's going to be significantly more because they're bringing machines and people back and forth and back and forth. Anyway, I'm just wondering if we can identify some local people that have the skills and the qualifications, that have some skin in the game in North Ogden,
Yeah, and that was kind of what I mentioned earlier about when we get the RFP ready, we will reach out to all the qualified firms. And we might get some inquiries from subcontractors. And with the initial process that's focused on the design, they won't be selecting the subcontractors yet.
Right.
But with that process, we'll have the opportunity to work with the contractors, say, hey, not only do we have general contractors who live in the city or community, have been here for a while, but we have subcontractors who might have the capability, and to just make sure that the general contractor is involved in picking a team that works, will make the project as successful as it can be, and meeting the goals. And obviously one of the goals is cost control.
Yeah.
So that we're getting what we need for the best value that we can.
And I think somebody local general contractor and subs maybe will put more pride into the project. I don't know.
I mean, I think that most of your general contractors know that these buildings are marquee buildings. And I know, and that's part of the reason that there's the concern with the Taj Mahal, right? Is that architects know that this building will be here and seen for 60 years. I mean, that's how long our other building's been here. And so I think getting a lot of pride, every single person who works on that facility will have that pride. But I think you're right that sometimes local folks feel an extra incentive to shave a little bit off their bottom line because they want to be involved in their local building.
And just to give Robert some insight, one of the individuals we met with is the president of a firm that's built numerous public safety buildings, and happens to be a resident of North Ogden. And in our discussion with him, he said, look, I'm a citizen here. I want to make sure we have what we need and not a whole bunch more, because he said, I'm a taxpayer here. But he said, I want something the city can be proud of. So the very thing you talked about is his desire to, as a citizen. And they built, I think, what was it, John? 4 or 5 of the last public safety buildings. So they have an idea what's needed.
Thanks.
In there. So I think your point is valid.
And I think you're right, Mayor, and it's also, and don't forget that we have 3 of the major Utah general contractors are tied to the city in one way or another. And I'm not saying they're better than the others, but you've got R&O, Wadman, and Big D have strong connections to North Ogden and Weber County. And then there's others that are in Weber County, and so we're gonna have a very good qualified pool of applicants for this, and architects, this is the type of project they just love these type of projects, which is part of the reason cost control is important, right? So, and sorry, that's not a dig against architects, it's just, they really, they want the value that we're putting in the facility to also be expressed in the design. That's probably the right way to say it. So, sorry, I sound like I'm choosing my words very carefully tonight, so I'm not offending people. So, but any questions about those 4 items, or anything that I could prepare for this group to help you with, if you know, anticipating questions that you might have, or I want to give this group the tools, because you're becoming the front line of the people who are going to be approached about questions and asked for opinions. But one final thought, and I will provide this to you when we know if there is a referendum. The new rules, it used to be the old rules stated if a referendum is issued, nobody associated with the city can say anything. Like, everyone be quiet, you know, pretend like you don't. I'm gonna have to find out the nuances associated with the citizen committee and how that works. But I can tell you, City Hall is allowed to answer questions, but it's a very structured process. And so there might also be some restrictions on this group as soon as it becomes active. Just keep that in mind, and I will provide you better instructions as we get closer. As you're aware, when you're a committee, you make a decision as a committee. When you're an individual, you don't represent the committee. And so I probably think you're going to be fine if you're acting as a private individual to share your opinions without fear of the rules. But I will provide some very clear guidance so that you don't have any concerns.
How soon will the RFP be sent out so that we get costs back?
I would say in theory, my goal would be to have the RFP out in a month, or at least ready to put out. So we've got feedback from the folks from this group. And then a response time is, I'd probably say about 6 weeks. And then from that, assuming that it's successful and we're starting the design process, that can take anywhere from 3 months to 6 months to complete, depending on how much resources the firm, you know, the architect and the contractor put into it. The nice thing about both the design build and the CMDC, and you know, we're kind of talking about this kind of this weird hybrid of those two, is that a lot of the design doesn't have, this is gonna sound terrible, it's not, you don't have to know where all the outlets are to really start and be moving forward and scheduling contractors and things. Whereas the original process, which is I can't think of the name of it, where the architect draws it up, you know where everything is going to go before you even hire a contractor. So some of those things will start moving together, and in theory, the process is shorter. But at the same time, we need to make sure that the city's taking its time so we don't make missteps. You know, a good example is this ground over here. There's going to be some dewatering that we're going to have to do. We ran into that over at the Public Works building, where we weren't expecting some dewatering, and it caught us off guard. And so there'll be some things we can do before even the design work starts, just make sure we know exactly what to address. So
I think in our agreement to purchase this home, how long before we have to close on that and the sun staying in there?
it was October 1st is the last day. So I think we anticipated that there wouldn't be any real site work prior to that time.
That's a good, so settlement deadline is October 1st.
And it could happen sooner.
That's a great contract. Good job. That's good work.
Well, and like I said, the homeowner, they were very great. It was like, it's a perfect time for their family and how they're transitioning things to just work out, and it was a culmination, kind of a perfect storm of the right time for everybody.
That's awesome.
So you want to hire him, is that what you're saying?
I'm impressed.
So 4 weeks to possibly have an RFP ready to go out. And how can we help with that process?
So when it comes out, we'll want some feedback, because part of the reason this group's involved is you have skills and specialties. Some of you might say, I don't know anything, and it might be helpful just to read it through and make sure John hasn't included typos.
And these 2 community members that the mayors are gonna reach out to, part of it is for their input on that.
Well, at least the one, the fundraising, obviously, it has a longer tail on it than developing the RFP, so Mayor Chug and myself could have to get on that really quick, because we're gonna want that input prior to getting the RFP out.
Lieutenant Crowder was wondering about sweat equity. He thought he could paint and do the roof.
I'll need something to do.
Save some money that way.
So rules have changed a little bit. There are some things we can do, but when it's a commercial structure, so this will fall under a commercial permit, as opposed to a residential type structure. There's actually a lot you can't do unless you have the proper licensures. So we'll, as much as we'd like to have folks out here with shovels, a lot of landscaping is a good example. We can do that without the need, but a lot of the other stuff inside, they're really careful that things are built to the proper safety codes. They don't trust police officers with hammers.
I won't say.
They can do nail guns.
So,
Okay, there's something comes to mind, I left it slapping. Anyway, so we're looking at that month to get that all out. Like I say, I think quicker that we can get information out there, of what the real cost is. Is it 6 million, there's 11 million, or whatever it is? The better chance we have of.
and I think it would be helpful, and we can ask for in the RFP, the idea of, hey, what's your general feel on cost per square foot for, and they won't give us good specifics, right? Because they're not, I think we'll make it clear there's no obligation that that's what we expect them to do. But I think it will help us as we further refine our process and our goals for the facility.
Just to answer Mayor Chug's question, John and myself went through that exercise, to try to validate, we got a number from the architect, right, the initial phase, the feasibility study, which I think surprised a lot of people. We wanted to get some sensation of if that number was close, and so we asked the contractor we met with, who has built numerous of these buildings, can you give us an estimate based upon the needs assessment the chiefs put together? That's, you've heard my statement, I have no evidence at this point in time, that I won't get some, but that it's anything less than what we're talking about. Well, I hope it is, but we have no evidence at this point. We've got 2 independent kind of verifications that not what we're talking about, it's in the range.
I know there's some people that have mentioned the fact that, we built the public works building over here, and we was able to scrape money off here and scrape money up here and scrape money out of this account and this type of thing, was able to get it built with cash from all these different funds within the city. And obviously, we got a bigger project than this one over here. And do we know how much money we can scrape up?
Well, we want to talk to you about your contribution before we made a final assessment on that. But, one of the differences is since that time, if you look at the amount of commitments and money the city has spent on other projects, we've used up a bit of cash. I love paying cash for things, but this building's gonna be $11 million. We don't have that cash. We scraped up, and Evan is gonna give us the detail, somewhere around $2 to $3 million. In that vicinity to make a down payment. So. It's a lot. That's great.
The other difference with that project is that it was okay for us to use water money, sewer money, stormwater money, solid waste money, general fund money. To pull from all of those resources to build that building. On this building, we can't use utility revenues. We just have general fund money basically.
What's the difference? Why?
Well, when you pay your water bill, the money you pay has to go toward providing water service. You can't use your water bill payment to pay for police service. So, but that facility is used by all of the funds,
Okay.
and so
In public
it
works.
makes sense that we could use that money for that facility. But police service is just a general fund operation, so we can't use the utility money.
I know when we built the last part of those buildings where the trucks are parked, we needed something like $400,000 and so forth. And I was in here begging Brian. Can you scrape that up? He said, yeah, I can. So
I'm not sure what creative method we use.
So
So
Chief,
Evan's gonna give us a detailed list of the monies. We talked pretty much in detail of where we can get the funds, where they're at. And he's also going to give us a more refined detail about what we've talked about paying for the bond. So we have some assurances, but that's a very good point that Evan's brought up. Is we're limited on where we can get the money for this building. It's limited to general fund, and that's where we've paid for, some pretty big projects because they're parks, right? And we also have, I think, a commitment that we haven't spent yet, that we know we've committed to, what, about $1.3 million, Evan, for the park down at Patriot Point, that contractually we're obligated to, so we can't use that money, even though it's in the general fund, because we have a previous commitment. So, it's a little bit different ballgame. But we think we can come up somewhere in that range of $2 to $3 million on a down payment, so to speak. So if it's 11 million, we're hoping we could bond for 8.5, say. In that range. That's prior to getting your commitment, Mayor.
And I think, to make sure it's clear, I think when the mayor's talking about the down payment, he's talking about the expenditures like buying the house. So it's not buying the house plus this $2 to $3 million. That's in the down payment that we're not
Design
bonding
work,
for.
things like
Yeah,
that. But we wouldn't have to borrow money to do, we use our own money.
for those reporters who may listen to this meeting.
can we put it in the RDA out there?
I was just gonna ask the chief if there was any way to clone Jason Child. And we could use some of those funds, put that, clone out in different cities and maybe even in the county and.
Robert, that mold was broken. There's never gonna be another Jason Child. One and all.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe we could solicit your help here like we do in Manaway and pick up some extra revenue.
So he left. Yeah, you saw how that worked out.
Yeah, saw how that worked out. Okay, John, you completed your items?
Mhm.
Any questions for John at this point in time? You covered that really well, and thank you. And next item, we'll open the meeting up for public comments.
We don't have any at this time.
See no comments, then I would ask if the committee has any comments, concerns other than what we discussed already.
I have a question for Katie. Do we have any other committee members joined by Zoom?
We do. Jay Johnson is on the call.
Okay, thank you.
Isn't Cheryl on there too?
And Cheryl, yes.
Okay.
For the one other thing I would say is there are 6,300 doors in North Ogden, right? 6,300 front doors. Okay. And out of those 6,300 doors that North Ogden Police responds to, there's a real benefit, right? There's a benefit to them being able to respond quickly, seamlessly, with 2 or 3 at the same time, so that if it's a domestic, whatever's going on, they've got each other's back. Anyway, out of these 6,300 doors, I guess I would just say, do the math on that. And what's the real value to our city by having our own police, force and public safety building and that kind of thing. And so I guess I would just encourage the committee as we're talking to people to say, we've got 6,300 front doors. Okay, that's a big deal. That's a lot. And that's just, how many more are to come? We've got several thousand more to come. So.
Chairman, Mayor, Jay Johnson would like to make a comment.
Okay.
Hey, committee. Just wanted to make one observation and just a comment that where I serve on the Northview Fire District Board as one of North Ogden's representatives there. When we built our new second fire station up on the hill, the Wadman, it's right next to that Wadman Nature Park up there, if you're familiar where that is. The Wadman sold the fire district that property for $1, which was, a great deal to save the taxpayers a lot of money. But we had to have the land surveyed by the county, and it was a huge cost. And so with that house that we're buying and the property on there, I want to say, I remember the cost being between $5,000 and $10,000 the county charges to resurvey the land. So that might just be one of costs that you'd want to just put in the back of your mind that we might incur with, incorporating that house. We thought it would be cheap, but it was quite expensive. Just wanted to put that out there.
Oh, and actually, we have another member that joined, that's been on Zoom. I didn't realize she was a committee member. So Karen McIntosh is also on here.
Okay. Thank you, Jay. Any other?
No. Not at this time.
If not, this meeting will come to a close and we'll have a motion for adjournment.
Motion, we adjourn.
Have a second? Okay. Gary Stoker. Any discussion or questions? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Meeting adjourned. You get to use the hammer.